It's a great pleasure to welcome you all. Obviously, you'll know about the current issues and the current campaigns around Black Lives Matter, and obviously we want to discuss that issue, and we want to discuss Black history, and we have some guest speakers from each of the political parties who are going to say a few words about Black Lives Matter, Black history, and the work of Show Racism Red Card. But obviously, you're not here to listen to me, and I'm seeing nods already, but you're here to listen to our guest speaker, the fantastic goalkeeper, Shaka Hislop, played for England's greatest football team, Newcastle United. Portsmouth, thanks Ian, Portsmouth, Reading, West Ham United, and of course, an international goalkeeper for Trinidad and Tobago. And I know you're live from Boston, the United States, Shaka, so welcome for waking up very early in the morning to join us. And we look forward to hearing from you now on the issue of Black Lives Matter. Obviously, Shaka, you're the honorary president of Show Racism Red Card, and it's a great pleasure that you've joined us, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say right now. Thank you, Shaka.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Stevens, and well, good morning from here to all of you, and thanks for joining us here, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, I probably think it's best to start with a quote from President Barack Obama in saying, progress doesn't always move in a straight line. It zigs and zags and fits and starts. And I think that's what we're living through right now. And you can see that just in the history and the perception of the Black Lives Matter movement that started seven years ago. You contrast how it was perceived and spoken about then to its acceptance and its validity as a movement now. And even more so to Colin Kaepernick kneeling before, first time he did it was before a San Francisco 49ers preseason NFL game. September will mark 4 years, and contrast that now to how it was received, how it was chastised then, to how it's become a sign and a symbol of today's protest. What we've seen over recent weeks and sparked by the George Floyd murder at the hands of the Minneapolis police came at a time where we witnessed so much of the Black experience, certainly the African American experience, speaking from this side of the pond, whether it was the murder of Ahmaud Arbery at the hands of vigilantes while out for a jog, Breonna Taylor sleeping in her own bed and a no-knock warrant. You have Christian Cooper, who had the police called on him because he dared to say to a white lady in Central Park that she needed to leash her dog. And then the final spark, which kicked off the protest that went from Minneapolis all across the United States through the UK and to the wider world, spoke to those experiences of African Americans here in the US and to Black and minority ethnic peoples in the UK and around the world. And what you saw weighed heavy on all of us. And for me, as a father, I joined, as Mr. Stevens rightly pointed out, I still serve as honorary president for Show Racism Red Card. And I was a founding patron. And I took that initial step in a promise to my children to make this world a better place. And at times I felt like I was failing. And to see the protests and the experiences live out in real time and in as public a manner and forum as they were, weighed heavy on my wife and I. And we took the decision, despite the pandemic, to go into Boston, the nearest major city to where we live, and join the Black Lives Matter March. And it was a decision that we took a lot of time in making because of the health issues, as I just mentioned, and all that comes with being part of that protest, the proximity to other people, etc. But we went with our eldest daughter, who was born in Newcastle, as it happens. And we marched the 2 miles from the starting point to the Senate House here in Boston. And I left there with a sense of relief, with the heaviness, feeling like it was lifting off of my shoulders because of the diversity of the crowd, because of the youth. You felt that the movement was in good hands, and it stood us all in good stead. And that diversity, that youth, you saw mirrored all over the world in every single one of those marches. And it speaks to who they are and where they see this world going. The next phase of those protests, I think we're now witnessing and living through now, whether it's in the form of the pulling down of statues that don't paint the truthfulness of our past, to the renaming of buildings. I think what we are recognizing is we have to be truthful with our storytelling, whether it's as hurtful as slavery or as colonialism. We have to allow those stories to be told in their fullest. We have to confront the ugliness of some of those parts. And my fear in our not doing that is that, especially at the school level, the space that we at SRtRC and the Red Card employ and inhabit, if we don't do that, it opens up challenges to every single one of our non-math or non-science based, or all of our non-science and non-math based learnings. And especially today in the informational age, to leave that void, I think opens up opportunities for dangerous exploitation. And now you're seeing the protests taking this turn because of what may seem like, there's no political will, and certainly no visible political impetus to deal with that unfullness of our learning, with that with that untruthfulness to our telling of our history. And we have to embrace the telling of our history in much the same way that we have to continue and we have to tell the fullest of the stories of our Black, Asian, minority ethnic neighbors, those who serve in the armed forces to the health services, those who are, from our doctors and our politicians to our teachers and our caregivers. Their roles in our communities today have to be told and have to be continued to be championed if we are to deliver on the promise of this moment in our history. And let's not kid ourselves. I truly believe that this is a generational opportunity for us to effect progress in a meaningful way, in a truly meaningful way. And I'll close by just saying this. Listen, we at SRtRC and the Red Card started this initiative, I believe, for the exact same reasons that you have chosen a life of politics, a life of public service, because we made and want to deliver on promises to our children, for a better world, for a more equal world for us all to live in, whether it's our children or our loved ones, or in many of your cases, your constituents. This is the moment to deliver that promise. Here in this fit and start is that opportunity to choose the fullest of our truths and carving the path forward as we tell those stories of our past and champion those stories of our present. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shaka. That was an excellent presentation. I don't know if you're on gallery view, but there was certainly a number of people applauding that contribution. Now we're now going to open up for questions, Shaka. So the first question is going to come from Tan Desi, and then it's going to be Councillor Graham Campbell. Just for anyone else who wishes to ask Shaka a question on his presentation, if you could please indicate in the chat function. But Tan, over to you first.
Thank you very much, Chris. And first of all, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Tan Desi, I'm the MP for Slough, and I wanted to pay tribute to Jed Grebbie and the entire Show Races and the Red Card team. I think you're doing an absolutely amazing job campaigning around the country to change society through sport. And Shaka, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I think a lot of food for thought for all of us. And thanks also for being our honorary president. In terms of two things I wanted to ask you, we were of course all horrified by what we saw in Minneapolis, but we know that police brutality has existed for not years, but decades and centuries. Yeah. The only difference was that we could actually see it, play out excruciatingly for almost 9 minutes. I think that's the real difference now. But do you think that we should be building on this movement to make it have a lasting impact in those countries which shy away from discussing about police brutality, and that, especially in Asia and Africa, where people they're just almost taking it in a joking way. They share videos on WhatsApp and Facebook and whatever when they see a police person beating up somebody else, and we need to change the narrative there to make it a truly global movement. And my second question to yourself is, don't you think that it's about time that we changed the curriculum, even here in Britain? We need to be teaching about colonialism, and we need to be teaching about slavery, because we need to learn from the likes of Germany, where they built on from the horrors of the Holocaust, but because they faced their collective past, I think they've moved on, and fair play to them. But I think we've got a lot to learn from them, and how do you think that we can more effectively do that here in Britain? Thank you.
Certainly, I'll go in order of questions, and I totally understand the question and what you're saying about police brutality through Asia and through Africa. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and right now, as we speak, there are protests going on around the killing of 3 young men at the hands of police. And if you tune into the images right now in Trinidad and Tobago, you would think that we live in a police state and not just some idyllic Caribbean country. So I totally understand. And yes, I think those are those images that we've had to endure and live through and have formed part of our collective histories, be it here in the US and in the United Kingdom, about police brutality to minorities, ethnic minorities, needs to be addressed, and not just addressed in those own countries, but the lessons then need to be shared with those other corners of the world that we're speaking about, because I feel that the police are an integral part of our communities, but the images that have become shared memes almost at times, I don't feel adds to the fabric of who we are, and doesn't promote the police as being parts of those communities. I'm trying to the second part of your question about our responsibility in education and in schools. As I alluded to, I feel we especially at the school age, and given that that's where Show Race and the Red Card's focus has always been from its founding, we have this opportunity now to truthfully tell those stories of our past, as bleak as they may be, as disturbing as they may be, and in this informational age, if we don't, it allows everybody to challenge everything we've learned, good, bad, and indifferent. And with that challenge, I think you open up the opportunity for all kinds of conspiracy theories to fill that void. So we have a responsibility to our young people and to our educational system at large to tell those stories truthfully and to deal and confront with them. And you're right to bring up the Germany and how they have dealt with the Holocaust. And let's contrast that with something that we are living through right now here in the US with the Confederacy and the flag and the emblems and the monuments. Whereas Germany has distanced itself from everything and everyone involved with the Holocaust and have been very forceful in pursuing those who took part, even now in their older years. They have pursued those who took part. The Nazi flag it's illegal to fly that in public. And they have dealt with and confronted the ugliness of that. And I think as a country, as a society, they have moved past. Yet still here in the US, there are still many states in the South that fly the Confederate flag. You still have the current president of the United States saying that monuments to Confederate leaders need to stay up because they are an important part of our history. And I just don't understand that thinking, especially when you use the recent history of Germany and how they dealt with their issues. And then it also paints the Confederacy in a way that they lost the Civil War. They wanted to maintain slavery. They were fighting for the right to continue to enslave Black people and lost. And yet still those monuments take pride of place in so many cities across the US. I don't understand how or why that is still being championed at the highest political levels.
Thanks, Tan. Graham Campbell. Well, I think we'll take Graham Campbell's question, then question from Chris Matheson, and then we'll hand back to you, Shaka. Thank you. Graham.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Shaka, for your wise words there. My basic question is this. Before Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's murder, English and Scottish football were experiencing a rising problem with terrorist racism and from online recruited far-right ultra groups influencing that. Are the SFA and the Football Association and the Premier League and the SPFL really on board with the BLM agenda? Or is this, when you see their shirts saying Black Lives Matter, is it tokenism? I have to say, as a West Ham fan, and I'm going to talk about personal experience briefly, I first went to a West Ham game for the first time in 1981, and I saw Bobby Barnes undergo during the warm-up, and you remember him. He had bananas thrown at him during the warm-up by our own fans, a minority of them, but that was the first and last time I went to a home game for 20 years, because it was not a welcoming atmosphere. And that was West Ham at the height of their powers and everything, but probably the best team they ever had was that team, and I didn't go back to see them. It took 20 years for me to return to Upton Park.
Thanks, Graham.
I know that that's not necessarily the experience of a lot of people today, but we've had the recent issues with Raheem Sterling's abuse online. We've had the England team in Bulgaria and all the lack of action by the football authorities there. Are the football authorities really taking this seriously? Has the moment arrived where they will?
My hope is yes, that moment has arrived, and I understand your concern. I agree. I feel at times football can do a whole lot more and should do a whole lot more. And I mean, the highest levels of football administration. I feel they have sidestepped the opportunity and their responsibility to the game and the positioning of the game. And I make this point, and as Jed always has done, football is perfectly placed to deal with the issues of racism. I've always felt that football stadiums are a small reflection of the communities that they live in. And footballers, as a result, have a responsibility to those communities, which was my only motivation when I first started with Show Racing the Red Card 25 years ago. I felt an obligation to give back to the community that I was playing in. And Show Racing the Red Card was my vehicle in doing that. I also feel that football, and maybe I'm a little bit arrogant in saying this, but football clubs and football teams can also represent the best in. I don't want to overstate our importance as footballers, but as I see it, at times the best of our humanity. In that, sometimes you're great, and you have to know how to uplift someone around you who maybe isn't having a bad day. Sometimes you are having a bad day, and how can you promote and support the players who are? It helps in so many of our life issues of today, whatever that may be, in terms of conflict resolution, or how you deal with and question authority. And I know we have a referee on board with us, but that paints our picture as to the roles that footballers can play in just our everyday lives, and how we'd like to see these things play out. And admittedly, we often don't get it right ourselves on those football fields. Similarly, as a footballer, where else can I sit in a room that's no more than, let's say, 20 feet by 20 feet, and share that space with somebody who's from Cameroon, somebody who's from Bulgaria, from Scotland, from England? You have people from all four corners of the globe, all sitting in this 400 square foot area, all sharing in an experience, and all supporting each other in an end, which is ultimately to win that game. And if we don't, how do we make each other better for the next time we step out onto that field? I feel those are the elements that football, be it the SFA or the English FA, or any other aspect, any other body within football, need to build on and tell those stories and champion those stories. And I just don't feel that there's been I just don't feel that the effort has been unified enough. We of course have our individual stories, be it those players who've supported us here, or Kick It Out, or more to today, as you point out, Raheem Sterling or Marcus Rashford in his efforts. But I think at the highest level of our game, we haven't unified those efforts in a meaningful enough way.
Shaka, thank you. Last questions, Chris Matheson. Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Shaka, actually, this is a similar question to what Graham has just been asking around. But my initial feeling was that by and large, football responded well to the Black Lives Matters protests in a way that perhaps 20 years ago wouldn't have happened. There was protests before kickoff for players collectively taking the knee in solidarity. You might have seen, and Jed, I'm looking at, I think it was Burnley, where somebody flew what I consider to be a racist banner. And again, the club acted very quickly, and the airport acted very quickly to stop that. And in a way that, as again, wouldn't necessarily have happened. And as Graham said, there is a continuing right-wing presence. The so-called Football Lads Alliance and fascist, racist groups like those are still around. And I think it's so important that the culture of football that they're not allowed to own the culture of football. and that the culture of
Yes.
football is owned by us. You were talking,
Mm-hmm.
Shaka, before about the racist, the southern states of the USA, and they got these statues to racists and slavers and so on. And they're told right from an early age that their identity is wrapped up in that Confederate flag and in flags of, is it General Lee and whichever.
Yeah.
And that's how they're told their identity is. And so it was so important, I think, for us and for football that we seize that we hold on to the identity of football as an anti-racist force for good, and not cede that identity to the racists who are still around us. Again, I think Graham sort of asked this, but we talked about, and you talked about, the football authorities. I'm wondering how we embed that amongst the supporters. How do we get these supporters to understand that the future of football is an anti-racist movement and not these fascist, racist Football Lads Alliance type groups?
Absolutely, and thanks for the question, Chris. I think the game in question was Burnley at Manchester City, if memory serves me correctly, and a Burnley fan paid to have White Lives Matter flown over. I can't go on without paying full credit to Burnley as a football club, how they handled it, and their captain Ben Mee, and how he spoke immediately after the game, the emotion that he showed, and how he represented for that football club. Highest plaudits go out to them both. But yes, there is that void that far right continues to try to fill, and will take every opportunity to do that, and we have to speak to that fullness of our history, whatever it may be, and as ugly as it may be at times, we have to confront it if we truly want to move forward in a meaningful way. And I think what you've seen over recent weeks and months is that this generation, particularly this younger generation, are prepared to take that on, because I think that there's, as I marched in Boston and I looked around at the crowd, and as I mentioned, not just the youth, but in particular, the diversity of it. It struck me that this generation are appreciating the Black Lives Matter movement as not just an African-American issue, as not just a BAME issue. This is a human rights issue. And the cliche I use, it's a footballing cliche I always use, is a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think the temptation here, again, to use a footballing analogy, is it's a zero-sum. Rights is not a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game meaning for somebody to win 2-0, somebody has to lose 2-0. That's a zero-sum game. I don't see human rights as falling into that category at all. Human rights is in a rising tide. And that's what I'm seeing. That's what I feel we are witnessing here. By lifting Black lives and the rights of Black lives, you are lifting the rights of our women. You are lifting the rights of our immigrants, of our asylum seekers. You are lifting the rights of our LGBTQ community. We are lifting all human rights together. And that, I think, is the appreciation, and probably the biggest shift from generations gone by, where, as was mentioned, people will monkey chants and throwing bananas at football stadiums, to now witnessing the marches that have gone global and the makeup of them. And as much as I will continue to champion and applaud what we've seen over recent weeks in terms of football games, with the Black Lives Matter patches on the arm and the taking a knee and the symbolism of that, it's just as important to figure out and be meaningful in what we do when we stand up, when we are wearing a shirt that doesn't have a Black Lives Matter patch on the arm. That will ultimately be how history judges this moment in our time.
Shaka, thank you. Really inspirational stuff. Honestly, Shaka, has been a tremendous to have you here today and to answer those questions. And the points you make are very well made. I just want to say, Shaka, it's not just your inspiration as a footballer. I still remember that save at Sheffield Wednesday in your first season. I think it was your debut. It was one of your first games. But can I just say to you, Shaka, as the MP for Glasgow South West, the work that Show Racism, the Red Card do, and I do want to say this to you as the honorary president, the work that Show Racism, the Red Card do in schools is really, really inspiring. It takes your breath away just watching football. Put in very simplistic terms, the differences between asylum seekers, refugees, economic migrants, just tremendous stuff. So Shaka, I'm going to give, if you go into the gallery, I'm going to give people the opportunity to give you a round of applause, because it certainly very much deserved, Shaka. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate the time to being able to speak with you.
Thanks, Shaka. So the next item now is Baroness Christine Blower, who many of you will know was involved in the trade union movement in regards to education and the education union. Christine is going to say a bit about the importance of Black history and anti-racism on the national curriculum and how education is important. Christine, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's great. And I have to say, it's an absolute privilege to be on this call with Shaka. I've been the vice president to his presidency for quite a while now, and this is the longest we've actually managed to have any kind of exchange. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Shaka. I want to start with a quote from Nelson Mandela, because why wouldn't you? It is that he has always said that education is the greatest weapon we have to change the world. And it's true. But of course, what we also know is that all of those guys associated with the Football Lads Alliance, you know, all of those people who are on the extreme right, they have been through our education system. And so, as Shaka was saying earlier, there have been failures and there have been gaps, because some people come out of our education system okay, but clearly some people don't. And so I want to say that for me, and this is not new. I mean, in the same way as Shaka has said, the Black Lives Matter movement is not new. I was in Minneapolis in 2014 at an American Federation of Teachers conference when we had a Black Lives Matter march there, and we had Trayvon Martin's mother come and talk to us. So it's not new, but there is something about this moment because it's global. And I think it's because that police officer with complete impunity thought that he could brutally just kneel on somebody's neck, and he didn't care that he was being filmed. And that means that we cannot move from here now without saying we absolutely have to do everything that we can. So I've been saying for a lot of years, both as General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers and as a teacher myself, yes, that Black History Month is fantastic. Teachers and students do brilliant stuff in the month of October for Black History Month. But what about the other 11 months? What is it that our Black students and our white students, our BME students, what is it that they see in the curriculum that is about them and about their history? And so, for me, a school as an institution, it's not good enough for it to say we don't have racism. That's not good enough. Schools and education institutions have to be actively anti-racist. They have to make sure that kids themselves and the staff have the tools to deal with racism by being actively anti-racist. And one of the things about the curriculum, which a lot of people will know, is that the kind of dead hand of the national curriculum came in. It's been a political issue. What gets taught in schools has been determined by politicians at the Department for Education. And that isn't where it should be. We should have a national council for the curriculum and assessment, where the voices of all of the people who are invested in education, so teachers, but parents, governors, the community, representatives of the community, should discuss what the curriculum actually looks like. And I'm not going to say what should be in it, but my view about it is that the curriculum in school should be a mirror. So when you look at the curriculum, you are able to see yourself, your community in that mirror. But beyond that, it should also be a window that opens out from where you are in your classroom, seeing yourself, seeing your history. You should also be able to see the much wider perspective, which is why it's important that we teach about global issues. It's why we do teach about American history. And yes, we teach about the Confederacy, but Shaka lives near Boston. If you go and have a holiday in Boston, you can go and have a guided tour of Black Boston. There's a brilliant memorial of the Black regiments who fought in the Civil War. So if you have the advantage of living in Boston, then you get a different picture of what American history is about from what you get in the southern states. So they should be doing that there, but we should be doing that here. So it's really critical for me. I mean, I started teaching in 1973. We didn't have the national curriculum. We had that flexibility to be able to look at what young people were interested in, looking at what we were interested in, and build out from that, so that their experience of the curriculum was entirely different from what it's been for the last, 20 years, nearly 30 years now. So it's important for me that Show Racism the Red Card is doing fantastic work funded by my union, the National Education Union, in Wales, to make sure that they get some amount of time about how you teach, how you have an anti-racist perspective in the curriculum. It's really important, but they don't get that in England. Our teachers are not being trained to deal with and confront the issues of discrimination that our young people in schools from many different communities face as soon as they walk out of the door of the school, and of course, sometimes face when they're in the schools themselves. So I think this is a brilliant time for us now to be saying, we cannot go back to business as usual. We do have to look at what we're doing in schools. We do have to have the voices of more people than the people who have been on the curriculum. And it isn't just, obviously, it isn't just about history. It isn't just about Black history. Absolutely critical though that is. My daughter is with the kids who are in school and the kids who are not in school at the moment, doing a project about space. So obviously, the face of the person that she had on the space project was Mae Jemison, the first Black woman in space. So there are lots of things that we should be doing. She didn't say, I'm bringing an anti-racist perspective to this. She just said, there's a Black woman who is an astronaut. This is the person I want as part of what I'm saying. She's also talking obviously about all those brilliant women who helped NASA be able to even get to space, who we now know about because of Hidden Figures. When my kids were growing up, there were no children's books that we could easily get, which showed anything other than white kids. I have to say there weren't very many with women as central characters, but that it is possible to do that now. And we have to be saying to teachers, we as people who are interested and concerned about education, we have to say, this is what we have to do. We have to decolonize the curriculum. We have to say that there are different ways of teaching things. And it's not just about content, it's also about policies. It's also about making sure that the institution is an anti-racist institution. And I believe that we can do it, but it isn't going to just happen. We have to make it happen. We have to, those of us who are involved in education, those of us who are parents or governors or teachers, we have to be saying, we need to find the space to make sure that this is happening. And, one of the things about teachers is that they can be distinctly subversive sometimes. So I think that they shouldn't sit back and say, oh, well, there's no time in the national curriculum. We have to find the time in the national curriculum. We have to make sure it's in there. And ultimately, we have to change the national curriculum. So I really believe that if we think of the curriculum as a mirror and a window, where we see ourselves, everyone sees themselves, but also the window where we see beyond that. we will be in a much better position to think about what it is that we teach our children. And, you know, if we miss this moment, when the movement is so big, then I think we will have absolutely failed our children and our education system. Thank you.
Christine, thanks very much indeed. I mean, absolutely spot on about the importance of education and dealing with all of this. So, Christine, thank you very much indeed. So we're now going to hand over to some representatives of political parties to make some comments on both Black Lives Matter and Black history. And the first speaker I'm delighted to say is Anne McLaughlin, MP for Glasgow North East. Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Like Christine, I've long supported incorporating Black history into our children's education. And I'll introduce you to my backdrop, which is two historical figures. One is Florence Nightingale, the other is Mary Seacole. They have lots in common, but there's also three striking differences, and I'll come on to that in a moment. I'm going to give you just three of the many reasons why I think we should be incorporating Black history into our education system. Firstly, it's honest. There's a fantastic television series called Horrible Histories. Well, how about honest histories? Why are we so selective in our account of history? What are we so afraid of? Let's get the truth out there. And when we do, we'll discover that there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of and everything to gain. The second reason is it gives children historical role models of all ethnicities. They may still choose to look up to someone of a different ethnicity, but at least they'll have that choice and that knowledge. I had so many friends who are Black and Scottish or English, and they tell me that they were acutely aware growing up that people who had their skin colour didn't have influential roles, if you like, and that told them that neither would they. I remember Idris Elba speaking in Parliament a few years back. I'll never forget Idris Elba speaking in Parliament a few years back. But I remember him telling us that he used to walk past the House of Commons and he just knew that the place wasn't for the likes of him. And that was partly because he was working class, but it was mainly because he was Black. It was hard to hear what he had to say, but the first Black MP in modern times was elected in 1987 when he would have been 15. So you can see that link right away. Role models who look something like you matter. And the third reason is that I think it should be incorporated is because children are not born racist. They learn to be racist. But if white children grow up knowing that it wasn't white people who developed the modern world all on their own, they're less likely to be able to be corrupted by racist adults. I'm not just talking about slavery, because the contribution of Black people to the modern world wasn't just from slaves, it was from Black scientists, medics, philosophers, etc., etc. But let's look at slavery, because I want to give an example from Glasgow that's very personal to me. I was born near to Glasgow. I assume my forefathers and mothers helped to create, build and develop the modern city that we now inhabit. Anyone who meets me will assume the same. My partner, who you've heard from already, is Jamaican. He is assumed to be an incomer to the modern city of Glasgow, built by my ancestors. But his ancestors were slaves on plantations in the Caribbean. My ancestors and my city benefited massively because of his ancestors. So how is he an incomer? He's not. Glasgow belongs to him as much as it does to me. And now he's an SNP councillor now, so I think that message is getting across. But if the children of Glasgow learn about this from an early age, it will expand their idea of who Glaswegians are. It will make it harder for the views of adult racists to seep into their developing minds. And before I just say a wee bit about Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole, for all the MPs on the call, I am setting up the APPG on unconscious bias. The first investigation will be into unconscious racial bias, and it's a week on Monday, so please, when I email you, please come back and say yes, you'll join it. So what these two have in common, they both treated wounded soldiers in the Crimean War. Both were absolutely heroic in the contribution they made to our medical history. Mary Seacole was Scots-Jamaican. She even fundraised to be able to set up the hospital that she led. And you should read up on her if you don't know about her, because she was inspirational. But the three differences: one, Florence was heralded as a hero throughout all teaching at all schools in the UK, and Mary was never mentioned. I went to 8 different primary schools across England and Scotland, so I know. Secondly, one was fated and the other had no acknowledgement until a statue was erected in 2016 looking onto Parliament. And even that was vigorously opposed by some campaigners. Third, and most tellingly, one was white and one was black. It's one of many, many examples. It is not difficult to find historical people who have made a massive contribution to the world and who are not white. There is no excuse. So I'll just rest my case on that, I think.
Anne, thank you. Fantastic speech, and thank you for being here. You got a round of applause from your partner. I don't know if you saw that in the gallery view, but thank you, Anne. Again, importance of education and history. So the next speaker representing the Conservative Party is Douglas Ross. Douglas, we'll try not. I know you're as someone who is also a referee. We'll try not to boo you on this occasion, Douglas, but we do look forward to what you've got to say. Douglas, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. And I suppose it's part of my refereeing that has increased my interest in the Show Racism the Red Card campaign, just because what we as officials do with players around Scotland and around the country every year. But I want to start, first of all, by thanking Shaka for his presentation. I mean, I think it might have almost been better to have no politician speaking and just having Shaka for an hour, because it was inspirational stuff and it really did hit home everything that we done. And I also think it's important that there's a lot of fans of different clubs on here. When I told my referee pals that I was on a Zoom call with Shaka Hislop, they were equally impressed by that. So across football clubs and indeed the whole football community, people are impressed, Shaka, by what you've done and what you continue to do. And before I come on to my remarks, I just want to pick up a bit on what people were saying about football bodies themselves, and is enough being done. I'm fortunate enough to officiate in Scotland, where I think we can say it as Scottish matches, racism, it does not play a part. Yes, there is sectarianism in some matches, but pretty much we have no issues of racism in Scottish football matches. However, when I go abroad on behalf of as an international official on FIFA and UEFA duties, the briefings and the message that we get from the governing bodies could not be clearer about what we have to do on the pitch as players and officials, and also what is expected in the ground. So sometimes, and I understand the concerns that people have, but I can say, certainly from my involvement with the governing bodies, that they take racism in football as serious as any other issue, and they continue to develop what is being done to ensure that we can eradicate it from our game, because it's got absolutely no place in football. I just quickly want to pick up on one point that Anne said, and I thought Anne's presentation was great, and I was thinking about using this same quote as Shaka was speaking, but no child is born racist. And it's almost too easy for us to say. Why do we say it and then not consider, well, why do they then turn into racists? What is it in their education, in their home life, etc., that takes them from this innocent young child with no preconceptions about racism or understanding of it to turn them into these disgusting individuals that some become? And I think we need to look at that further. Just on the Show Racism the Red Card campaign, I agree about the great work that's been done. All I thought when I read the annual review, which I thought was great again this year, was there's only 20 of Scotland's 32 local authorities. So a third of our authorities in Scotland are not part of this campaign and are not being included. So I don't know if we can just get a wee update on that, because you do outstanding work, and your engagement in Scotland, and I have to speak about Scotland as MP for Moray, is brilliant. But let's look at increasing that from the 2/3 that are involved to the 1/3 that are not. And finally, obviously, I've been asked to say a few words just on behalf of the Conservative Party. And I just wanted to quote what the Prime Minister said last month in a newspaper article on this, on Black Lives Matter, on what we need to do as a government and as a country. And he said there is much more that we need to do, and we will. It's time for a cross-governmental commission to look at all aspects of inequality in employment, in health outcomes, in academia, and in all walks of life. And I think, regardless of politics, we can agree that this campaign and what has been done has come a long way, but it's got a long way still to go. And I think actually the benefits of it will be as we work together, cross-party, cross-government, to make a difference. And it's something I'm very keen to do. And I think today's cross-party group has been another step forward in that. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. I think that was I think you made a very important contribution in the perspective you have as an official with the SFA, and obviously the work and the officiating you've had to do abroad. I think that was very, very helpful. And thank you, Douglas, for emphasising the Prime Minister's message. Jed will be saying, Jed Greby, the Chief Executive, will be saying something about the campaign priorities. So I know he's noted what you've said about some Scottish local authorities who perhaps need a shove. So thanks very much for that, Douglas. Your contribution very much appreciated. So the next speaker is Ian Lavery from the Labour Party, who I believe also supports England's greatest football team as well. Ian, I'm sure you'll say something about that. Yes, the fists pumped there, I think gives it away. Ian, we very much look forward to your contribution on behalf of the Labour Party. Thank you.
Listen, it's great to be on this call. I mean, I've been involved with Sure Race and Red Card for quite some time now. And I've got to pay a tribute, mine, to Jade Greby and Jade's team. Another from the northeast, and another, the vast majority of them are Newcastle United supporters. Come on. But the reality is Jade has been under tremendous pressure for quite some time to, in terms of funding for racism, for the education, which Christine mentions, getting into the schools, because that's where we need to continue this fantastic campaign. And it's amazing. It's only, honestly, it's only 18 months ago where it looked very much as if Sure Racism, the Red Card, perhaps could have went out of business, for the want of a better term, because of lack of support and finances from the government. I find that unbelievable. And I've got to say this, I'm a politician. I make no apologies for saying this. I'm absolutely frightened at the tone of politics at this moment in time in both the UK and in America, and of course, Europe and further afield. I feel quite ashamed at times, because I'm absolutely certain we're not doing enough about it. Dog whistle racism isn't acceptable anywhere. And we've got to challenge racism every time we see it, whether it's in the schools, whether it's in the parks, whether it's in the community centres, whether it's in Parliament. We've got to challenge racism. And I think the looking back, I'll listen to what Graham said, the West Ham supporter. Graham mentioned he can remember one of the first black players playing for West Ham, when West Ham supporters were themselves throwing bananas at their own players. I've seen that, Graham. Seen that at Newcastle, when I think I'm right in saying it was Howard Gill who was the first black player to play for Newcastle. He went on, I think he came from Liverpool. He went on to play for Sunderland and a whole number of other teams, and how embarrassing, how disgraceful it actually was. But it was the absolute minority, and we should always remember that. And that's why we've got to concentrate on these people. I think it was Chris Mathewson mentioned the ADL and the Football Lads Alliance. We've got to clamp down on these people. We need to do everything we can politically to clamp down on these people and rid them from society. Because you see, I'm from the northeast of England. I'm from a community. My constituency is Wansbeck, and it's about 99.8% white, working class people. We haven't got to my, well, it's not my eternal shame, but I would love to be living in a much more culturally diverse society, but we've got lots of towns and villages right across the country who have got similar sort of statistics than mine. And the only way we can get the message across about racism, or the most important, most significant, critical way we can do it, is by education. It's got to be, as Christine mentioned succinctly and right to the point, we've got to change history. We've got to change this national curriculum on a whole number of issues. How many people on this call remember being at school and learning about logarithms and reading the books and saying, well, this logarithm, how have you ever used that since you've left school? What's the point of learning the lots of the stuff on the national curriculum when it doesn't do anything for your life chances? It doesn't educate you into what happened many years ago, decades and centuries ago. We need to make sure that the national curriculum from a very young age is changed to involve and educate our kids about the history, the fact that the country was a colonial power to our eternal shame, the imperialist power to our eternal shame, and stop glorifying the slave traders, for example. We've got a lot of work to do, and I'm conscious of the time, but education is the most important thing with regards to this. Football is a great vehicle, particularly for areas like mine, where young people, the first time they like experience people with a different colour skin will be at a football match. And people look up to the fantastic Shaka Hislop. He's one of my heroes, Shaka, one of my heroes, comrade, real good hero, season ticket holder in Newcastle for a million years. But this is like the introduction to people with different coloured skin, and that's at a football match. And that's where we've got to make sure that the fantastic work that the footballers do in terms of the sure racism, the red card, Olivia Bernard, Shaka, John Anderson's been brilliant, Rosina, lots of these people, not to mention everyone, of course. That's where they become that shining example, and that's what we've got to continue to do. The superstars, these are people who the kids look up to. So we need that education from a very, very early age. And I'll just conclude, Chris, by saying this. Black Lives Matter isn't a movement. It's a movement.
Ian, thank you. That was spot on. And lots of nods and applause there, Ian. Thank you. And I think that you're quite correct to mention not just education, but obviously funding and the funding challenges which Show Racism, the Red Card, have faced. And this is probably a good time now to hand over to Jed Grebby, the Chief Executive, who's going to say a bit more about Show Racism, Red Card and its campaign and priorities. Jed, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all the speakers from the different political parties. We completely appreciate having cross-party support at Show Racism, the Red Card. This is going out live on our Facebook, so I will give a plug for our next event now. We have Shaka taking part in the debate with Unison, the trade union in the northeast of England, next Thursday at 5 p.m. It's a fantastic lineup for Newcastle, Sunderland and Middlesbrough fans. So from Middlesbrough, we have Curtis Fleming, former Middlesbrough player. From the little team called Sunderland, we have Gary Bennett, the former captain. That's a joke for all Sunderland fans, by the way. And then from the Mighty Mags, we have Shaka and two more entertainers, Steve Howie, John Beresford. We have John Anderson and we have Olivia Bernard. So please join us next week at 5 o'clock for what should be a fantastic look into the campaign at Show Racism, Red Card and the work that we do. I totally agree with what Ian said. The Black Lives Movement is a fantastic opportunity for anti-racism and anti-racist campaigners throughout the world. And I think Shaka has articulated that. We want to make this opportunity to change our society, to have more equality. And I think Christine's given the example of how Show Racism, Red Card would like that to happen via our national curriculum. But of course, it won't just be about the national curriculum. It won't just be about education in schools. It'll be about across the board. So we hope more MPs will come on board with our campaign. We're very keen this year to expand the all-party parliamentary group in what we do. To give a few ideas of what we're going to be doing, in December is the 25th anniversary. Shaka sent the letter that established Juris Red Card on the 22nd of November 1995, and we established the campaign in December. So it's the 25th anniversary, and we want to make sure it's a celebration, not just of our work, but of anti-racism in general at Juris Red Card. So please join us. Our aim is to have a number of events in Parliament. Hopefully by that time, we won't have a lockdown and we can get into Parliament to do some events. We've had some fantastic Hall of Fame events in the Speaker's residence in the past, and we want to celebrate 25 years of campaigning. The reason our charity's had such a brilliant response in the last few months is because we've been campaigning now for 25 years on education and combating racism. So we believe that the anniversary will be an opportunity to do that. To all MPs, please get involved in Wear Red Day. It's our one day where we ask you to wear red, the colour of our charity, and take part in activities. Douglas Ross mentioned the councils in Scotland. Now, I think what you're talking about there, Douglas, is the 20 councils involved in our education work. I will make sure you get a report on how the other councils have responded to Wear Red Day, because my understanding is every council in Scotland does engage with Juris Red Card, at least in Wear Red Day. But certainly we do need some more support. I think Scottish councils, actually percentage-wise, are more on board than English and Welsh ones. So, but we do need more support of the local authorities and indeed of supporters throughout the UK. So Wear Red Day is on the 16th of October. And I'll leave it there now because I know that we've run over a little bit on time, but I'll hand back to Chris, and thank you for all your support.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Jed, and thank you for all the work you're doing right across the UK. You know, the work is done in Glasgow is very much appreciated by me and other colleagues, Jed. I think it would be appropriate just to close off the meeting, rather than you hear from me. I think you would all appreciate if Shaka would maybe want to say a few words in closing. Shaka, if there's anything you'd want to say to everyone who's attended today.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gents, for your time and for your continued efforts. For us to build on the moment and really make this a Black Lives Matter movement is what we do from here, and that's ultimately, as I said before, how history will judge us. I'm confident that just in this group alone, we have the people, we have the intellect, we have the drive, we have the desire to make this the moment that we get to deliver on our promises that we made to our kids or to our constituents, that we will make this world a better place. Thank you very much. This is where it all started. Jed may reflect on a letter dated 22nd November 1995. I think in time we can look back on the 1st of July 2020 as another of those seminal moments. Thank you.
Shaka, thanks very much indeed, and thank you everyone for joining us. You're getting lots of applause again, Shaka, and so there's even Sunderland supporters clapping you, Shaka.
I just realized it's the 2nd of July, so hold your applause. Yeah. I just realized I haven't had my coffee yet, so
we noticed.
Right, Shaka, don't worry about that. Shaka, thanks for joining us. Everyone, thank you, and I hope to see you at the next event. Thank you very much.
See ya. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Well done. Bye-bye.